Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. And welcome to the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. I hope the sergeants are calling the members, but I think we can go ahead and begin as a subcommittee as soon as we have an author. We have two bills on the agenda that are being pulled by the authors. Item number 2, AB 284 by Mr. Nastandi, and item number 4, AB 763 by Mr. Berryhill, correct, Mr. Berryhill? And while we're waiting, it gives me a chance to introduce our new science fellow. Mandy Aaron is going to be working with the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. Welcome, Mandy. She is a veterinarian. So we're going to, and a PhD, that's right. So we're delighted to have her. And I'm gonna let my vice chair introduce the Assembly Republican fellow that's working with the committee as well, because I can't pronounce the name.
Sarah Petrowski. We are very glad to have another Fresno State Bulldog among us.
So, Mr. Jeffries, good morning.
Good morning.
We're ready for you.
Excellent. Well, Mr. Chair and members, you've heard this presentation before, so I will somewhat keep it brief. You will all recall or at least many of you will, the long drawn-out negotiations which finally resulted in the 2010 water bond that I think started in a ballpark of around $6 billion and finished around $11 billion by the time we were done doing our handiwork here in the Capitol. I ultimately became a co-author of a bill to postpone the water bond, as many did, for another election. I think many would agree that the bond was going to fail in 2010 if it had been on the ballot. I don't think the economy's changed much. I don't think the factors that have led us to postpone it have changed much. In fact, I would argue that there's even now more than ever a reason to try and reduce the size of the water bond. Basically, what I have proposed to you is a very simple approach to reducing the water bond. Probably as simple as it gets. 25% across-the-board reduction in every appropriation contained in the bond. It doesn't propose to change what is funded. Every project in there, good, bad, or otherwise, just remains at a reduced level of 75% as to what was originally passed. There are many reasons to consider other options, none of them which I think would be easily accomplished, if accomplished at all. If we reopen the water bond topic by topic, issue by issue, I don't think we'll see a water bond on the ballot in 2012. And if the bond stays on the ballot as currently drafted at $11 billion, I don't think it has a chance at all. And so while there are critics out there who would love to see it reopened and renegotiated on a line-by-line item, I don't think that we can afford that opportunity. And so I've presented to you what I think one person has said is a sledgehammer approach, and that's 25% for everybody. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Do you have any witnesses with us?
Probably not a one.
All right. And are there any witnesses here that would like to testify in support of Mr. Jeffries' bill? In support? Witnesses in opposition? There are a few coming.
I guessed that.
Not many, really.
Good morning, Chair Huffman and members. Cindy Tuck with the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA opposes the bill. And as you all know, the water bond was passed by the legislature in 2009 by a 2/3 vote. That's not something that's easy to accomplish. ACWA sponsored some questions on a field poll in November, and they gave us some new results. They don't say scientifically that the bond will pass in its current form, but they did have some positive results. And one of the results was that 62%, or 6 in 10 voters, believe that investing billions of dollars in a state bond package would be worth it to ensure reliable water supplies. And as you know, these investments can produce the jobs that California desperately needs. So that was a positive result. There's going to be more polling done early this year. We think the state, the legislature, and other thought leaders need to have that polling information before the bond, there's a decision to amend it or delay it. So we think this measure is premature. We suggest that the legislature should stay united because the bond is really critical for water infrastructure and enhancement of the Delta ecosystem. So we urge a no vote. Thank you.
Next witness.
My name is Lori Chen on behalf of Clean Water Action. Our position is that we'd like to see the topics revisited individually and sorted out without a heavy hammer. We see a lot of good things, but there's also some errors in how the financing could come from existing bond funds and things.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair and members, Dave Puglia with Western Growers Association. Largely echo the comments of my colleague Cindy Tuck from ACWA, but would also just note that it is a large bond, and it's driven in many respects by the fact that our water infrastructure needs have been neglected and are large. And we're concerned that an across-the-board reduction of this magnitude would leave us insufficient funds for many of the most important projects that have been in need for many, many years, if not decades, in the state. So we oppose for those reasons and others.
Noel Kramers with California Farm Bureau Federation, also opposed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Louis Brown on behalf of California Citrus Mutual, California Cotton Growers and Ginners Associations, the Western Agricultural Processors Association, and the California Rice Commission in opposition.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair, members. Glenn Farrell with the Front Water Authority. I just echo the comments of my colleagues in opposition.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Maureen Higgins representing Biocom, also in opposition.
All right, we'll come back to the committee, and why don't we go ahead and take the roll now that we have a quorum?
Huffman.
Present.
Halderman. Here. Berryhill. Here. Campos. Here. Fong. Here. Gatto. Hernandez. Hueso. Jones. Lara. Olson. Here. Yamada. Here. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Mr. Blumenfield?
I'm sorry. I have Miss here. Blumenfield.
Thank you. The telepathy. Well, Mr. Jeffries, I want to commend you, if nothing else, for having the guts to come forward in this lonely fashion and put one idea on the table. I think a lot of us have struggled to see the path forward for the water bond given where we are right now, and there's a lot of hindsight that could come into play in this situation. I personally believe that we should have put it to the voters for an up or down vote in 2010, and we'd be having, it would have been a down vote because we had a very useful focus group during the whole course of the year 2010 where editorial boards and stakeholders and others had the better part of a year to really kick the tires and take a look at this thing, and the message we got back was not good. So I think it would have been far better to just take the bad news at the polls and get to work on a different bond that could pass instead of having this thing hardwired for the ballot this year, which just confounds just about everybody on what to do. So I can't fault you at all. In fact, I commend you for stepping up with an idea. Unfortunately, it's an idea I can't support, but I'll let other members make their comments or ask whatever questions. Mr. Berryhill.
Yes, Assemblymember Jeffries, I've always appreciated your sense of humor.
Even when it comes to legislation?
And your talents at managing to get all sides upset on a bill.
I feel like I'm back in the bond negotiations.
Yes. You know, I just think that this bond from day one has so many projects that don't serve the purpose of a water bond, of creating water. In fact, or creating surface water. We've got $250 million to tear down the Klamath River Dam. I mean, this thing literally could tear down more dams than it ever builds. I just think there's a lot of problems with the wording in this bond. I don't think going across the board with 25% is the right approach. I would be willing to look at a bond that, if we opened it back up and got some of the projects that don't create water. And frankly, right now, with the wall of debt we're facing in California, I don't see any way any bonds are going to be passing on the ballot in the very near future. We've got a lot of problems to deal with financially in the state, and so I can't, unfortunately, support this, but I do commend you for the brave effort.
Dr. Halderman.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. A question and a comment. With the water bond negotiations, there were a number of policy measures that were imposed on the water agencies that would have to be complied with. Will those policy measures be decreased by 25%?
No, the policies were largely negotiated independent of the price tags that were assigned as the negotiations occurred. So the policies continue as previously adopted by the legislature.
So regardless of the outcome, the water agencies are tied to those legislative restrictions?
Yes. There may be some legislation that was contained that was contingent upon passage of some appropriation, but off the top of my head, I would have to say that just about everything remains, regardless if the bond passes or not.
Thank you.
That's right.
This is not the water bond negotiation committee. This is a piece of legislation that was negotiated over 8 years when there were different minority leaders, and I remember very clearly how everyone hated it, and it was the final result in the agreement. My concern right now is we are reneging on a promise, essentially. When we make an agreement, I agree with the chair. It was supposed to be on a ballot measure. That was the agreement, up or down. We don't have the right, in my view, to renegotiate it in this committee. And a major problem I have with that is the trust between the sides, not just on the water issue, but in terms of bipartisanship. I don't think we're helping our cause by overturning what was the product of a very long, very hard-fought negotiation. And for that reason, I am not able to support it. Thank you.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Jeffries, I think your presentation today is also part of your character. I believe you spent 27 years, was it, as a firefighter? And so, you know, it's that courage of going into blazing and very difficult conditions. Not to say that we do need water to put out fires as well. But I, too, for many of the same reasons, while I remain firmly opposed to the water bond that will be before us, we believe, in November of this year. I think when you take an approach of, you know, one size fits all and, you know, 25% reductions, I would certainly be willing to have additional conversations about how we reduce the size of this bond, but not disproportionately affect certain areas of the state in a negative way, or a positive way in that same sense. So thank you very much for that, and I'll be voting no.
All right, Mr. Jeffries, I know you've saved your best oratory for your close, so we're going to give you a chance to do that.
You're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah. Please, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Jeffries, I apologize for interrupting. But it's my understanding that this bond was put on the ballot by the legislature, and I agree with my colleagues that it was negotiated over a long period of time, and a lot of work went into it, and a lot of us agree with parts of it and disagree with lots of parts of it. But if there's a attitude within the voters that we can sense that it's not going to pass on the November ballot, then I believe as leaders in the state, it is incumbent upon us to make changes to the bond that we think might give it a better chance of passing if we believe it needs to pass and we need some of the elements of that water bond. So I appreciate Mr. Jeffries taking that stand and trying to show that there is an attitude in this legislature that we are going to lead the state. We need elements of this water bond to protect our state and to protect parts of it and to serve other parts of the state. When I got elected to the legislature, I didn't come up here on the water issues as Northern California versus Central Valley versus Southern California. I got elected to come up here and find solutions that work for our state across the state. So I do disagree with the premise that as the current legislature, we don't have the ability to go into this water bond and fix it so that it passes in November. I think if we all believe that there's things we can do to make it better, we ought to be doing those things to make it better. We ought to negotiate them quickly, and we ought to get it done quickly so that we can get that restructured bond to the people in November and let them have a voice on it. So with that said, because I do appreciate Mr. Jeffries' efforts, I am going to support his bill today, just for the fact that he's trying to make a difference here and get something done positive for the state. So if there isn't a motion, I'll make the motion. If there is a motion, I'll second the motion. I apologize for coming in late today, Mr. Jeffries, but I just wanted to share those comments with you before you close. Thank you.
All right, so you have a motion on the bill. Is there a second?
Can I second it?
How about it? All right, you have a courtesy second from Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you very much.
No,
I understand. I get it. That's okay. There's no dramatic closing here. We're seeing the beginning of bipartisan support to oppose the bond at its current size. We have not seen the beginning to reform the bond in a bipartisan manner. If we don't do something, this bond will fail, in my opinion. And I spent 16 years on 2 different water boards. I understand water issues statewide. I get it. We have to start somewhere. And it may, in fact, be that we start with a bill that uses this sledgehammer approach, and by the time it works its way through the various committees in both houses and negotiations with the governor, it becomes a much more refined and targeted bill. But we have to start somewhere. There is no other bill, to my knowledge, introduced to start, period, in either house. So we can begin the process today of killing the water bond, or we can begin the process today of revamping it and making some changes. I support changes. So I appreciate your consideration. I knew it was tough coming in, but it's still, the discussion still needs to occur at the very least, and I would appreciate your aye vote.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll call the roll.
Do pass to Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee. Huffman.
No.
Huffman, no. Halderman? No. Halderman, no. Berryhill? Berryhill, no. Blumenfield? No. Blumenfield, no. Campos? No. Campos, no. Fong?
No.
Fong, no. Gatto? No. Gatto, no. Hernandez? Hueso? Jones?
Aye.
Jones, aye. Lara? Olson? Olson not voting. Yamada? No. Yamada, no.
Bill's on call.
Yeah, it's it's on a very long call, Mr. Jeffries. It's
long distance. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe Mr. Dickinson was next. So, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you very much. This is AB 1005.
Move the bill.
Wow, that's efficiency in government right
I like
there.
it.
Yeah.
And I won't take any more of your time except to say I just wanted to make the committee aware that Assemblymember Chesborough is going to be a joint author of this bill and continue our efforts on this issue. I won't say anything more unless there are questions.
Well, if I could, Mr. Dickinson, There was an agreement reached in Natural Resources yesterday, and I think just for the benefit of the members, if you could sort of lay that out so everyone knows what you and Mr. Chesbro are working on, how this bill will or possibly might not, depending on the success of the ad hoc group, fit into that.
Sure. I'll try to do this in a very abbreviated fashion, but Assemblymember Chesbro and I asked the different interested parties to come together to discuss issues related to timber harvest plans, including how the process works, the revenues generated, the general fund subsidy that currently exists for the processing of those plans, and related issues. That working group, thankfully, all the interested parties, including the administration, is participating. And we've had one meeting of the full working group, some meetings of different segments of the working group. The notion is to use the legislation that we have before us, hopefully, ultimately, to carry the product of that work. If in fact we don't get to that point, then Assemblymember Chesbro and I will be introducing a new bill that will also be available for discussions if that becomes the operative vehicle to use later on in the session.
Right, and to the extent that recommendations from the working group make their way into this bill as it goes forward, this committee would have a chance to reconvene and consider the merits of those.
Absolutely. My pledge to both Assemblymember Chesbro as chair of Natural Resources and to Chair Huffman is to make sure that this bill proceeds on a consensus basis.
Okay. So with that understanding, I support Mr. Dickinson here. I think it's very important that we give this broadly constituted working group a chance to succeed on this important issue, and hopefully it can be done in the very tight time frame that this 2-year bill as a vehicle will call for. Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dickinson, I appreciate your bringing this forward, and as we look ahead, I would like to be added as a co-author, if that would be amenable to both you and Mr. Chesbro. I think this is a great approach. Thank you.
And by way of clarification, we're taking an amendment here in this committee that is in your binders, members.
Yes, I should have said that, and I apologize.
All right. So the motion that we have will be with that amendment, and I'll ask if there is a motion. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. We had a motion and a second at the beginning. So, Mr. Gatto, just to clarify, you're moving the bill as amended. Great. Very good. Let's call the roll.
Do pass with amendments to appropriations. Huffman?
Aye.
Huffman, aye. Halderman?
No.
Halderman, no. Berryhill? Berryhill, abstain. Blumenfield?
Aye.
Blumenfield, aye. Campos? Aye. Campos, aye. Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Gatto?
Aye.
Gatto, aye. Hernandez? Hueso? Jones?
No.
Jones, no. Lara? Olson? Yamada?
Aye.
Yamada, aye.
Right, the bill is on. Call needs one.
Thank you.
Ms. Huber, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Good to see you.
If I can just give people a second to file in.
Yeah, please begin. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I will try to be brief to save more time for the folks that would like to comment on the bill. As most of you are aware, AB 550 is a repeat of a bill done last term, but did fail to get a motion and a second before this committee before. It is a very simple in concept bill. It achieves two objectives. The first is to get the citizens of this state and this legislature an independent, full fiscal analysis of what a water conveyance system on the Delta will cost. That feasibility analysis would be performed by the LAO. Currently, we are not getting accurate projections on what the bill defines as a peripheral canal, but which others do call a water conveyance, is going to cost. And it could very well be one of the largest state infrastructure projects to date. Because of that, I ask that this committee approve the bill to get a full fiscal analysis from an independent body to tell us exactly how much it's going to cost. The second piece of this bill asks that the legislature, knowing exactly how much it's going to cost, do an up or down vote on the plan that comes out of the process that was approved by the legislature in 2009. It is not a bill that bans all water conveyances from the Delta. It does not ban a peripheral canal, but it does say we can't build the largest infrastructure project in California without legislative oversight, without the kind of information we need in order to say yes or no to the largest infrastructure project we could potentially see in California. Those are the simple concepts that are in this bill. I know that a lot of the opposition has addressed issues of they're afraid that the bill will kill any water conveyance. There is nothing in the bill that says that you cannot build a water conveyance. It simply says you can't build it until the legislature knows how much it's going to cost and votes it up or down. And I posit to you that this is the minimum level of oversight that we should be conducting in the legislature over a project of this size. And with that, I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Good morning, Chairman Huffman, members of the committee. My name is Osha Meserve, and I'm here on behalf of Reclamation District 999, which is in the northern part of the Delta. I've also speak from the experience of working since 2008 for a handful of other reclamation and local districts in the Delta, as well as Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge Association on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and related processes. I'm here to tell you that despite the legislative direction provided in 2009 to the BDCP, legislative oversight is still needed. The BDCP is not just another development project. It's the largest habitat conservation plan effort ever undertaken on the West Coast and would seek 50-year take authorization. Unlike a private development project, BDCP relies on the public to help pay for it. While the water contractors are paying for the planning costs, their ratepayers do not intend to pay for the actual costs of building the new conveyance, doing the 100,000 acres or more of habitat, and then mitigating the effects associated with those aspects of the plan. The total costs range up to about $17 billion, $12 billion for conveyance alone. This cost doesn't include other likely ecosystem restoration projects that will need to be done, also program administration or fixing the levees, which is not included in BDCP yet. It's probably closer to a $28 billion project. A significant portion of this BDCP cost right now is proposed to be paid by the bond. About half of the bond, $1.5 billion from the Ecosystem Restoration Fund, and then another $3 billion from the System Operation Improvement Fund for restoration, could go toward BDCP. With interest, the costs of borrowing that money from the bond basically double. So in addition to public bond funding, a public goods charge is also being considered on all water users within the entire Delta watershed, which makes up most of the state, in order to help pay for the BDCP. Such charges would increase water costs for millions of Californians, regardless of whether they directly benefit from the projects that are proposed to be built. Increasingly, and I think you've heard here, questions are arising as to the water ratepayers' ability and willingness to pay for even part of the BDCP. The cost of water from the Delta in the future will be even higher if a canal or tunnel is built, so high that other water supply options such as desal, conservation, or development of local supplies may be cheaper. Ratepayers in these service areas should have affordable water and need elected representatives to ensure they're not stuck with skyrocketing water costs for an uncertain benefit. The main argument against this bill is that the legislature has already provided the needed oversight to BDCP. But what are the bill opponents really afraid of? Are they afraid that the BDCP cannot withstand a basic economic analysis and that it will not be a worthwhile public investment? If a project cannot withstand that basic analysis, then the public, whether it's local ratepayers, water users within the Delta watershed, or statewide taxpayers, should not fund it. We're talking about a project with a price tag that's nearly 20% of the entire state budget, $137 billion. The legislature needs to provide a check on the power of unelected bureaucrats to determine how the public will pay for major changes to the water system. The state and federal wildlife agencies are not in a position to make a determination about the soundness of state investments when they issue take authorizations under the Endangered Species Act. According to the LAO in 2009, more comprehensive cost-benefit economic analysis of BDCP was needed to consider the impacts on third parties as well as the fiscal impact on state finances. That analysis still has not been done and will not be done unless you require it.
Ms. Meserve, I see we got a number of witnesses, and so I'm going to ask you to
Almost
wrap
done.
up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After hundreds of millions of dollars in analysis, we were told that the pumps in the South Delta should never have been placed there because of how they affect flow patterns in the Delta. We were told that the new intakes here on the Sacramento will restore a more natural flow pattern. Californians are being told they need to fund the BDCP's approach to water supply. As we adapt to current economic conditions, elected representatives must ensure that this is a project worthy of public investment.
Thank you. I'm going to have to move to the other. Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, other members, Paul Yoder here today on behalf of San Joaquin County. San Joaquin County and the other Delta counties they have always wanted a formal cost-benefit analysis of any conveyance option. If you were going to do any project of this size for any other reason, you would, of course, in fact, require a formal cost-benefit analysis. That is what should happen with this, and I just respectfully submit that to you today. I think Mr. Jones made some interesting comments earlier on the Mr. Jeffries' bill. I just want to submit to you, you're a different legislature. There's a different governor. You're not bound by anything. You obviously, some of you may feel more bound than others, but to the extent you can actually make what happened in 2009 better and better for more Californians and less divisive, you do have opportunities to do that this year, and I think you should seize those opportunities, and that is my testimony today. So thank you. I'd urge an aye vote on Ms. Huber's bill.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Tom Zuckerman. I'm here on behalf of the Central and South Delta Water Agencies, and I concur wholeheartedly in the comments that the other witnesses and the author have made. I would just add that we found out quite by surprise this last week in a meeting with Undersecretary Merrill of the Department of Natural Resources that the state that the BDCP program does not intend to do any cost-benefit analysis of the conservation measures that are proposed under the BDCP. Deferring to the beneficiaries of the state water project to deal with those issues when they seek permission from their ratepayers, which represent a very large majority of the people in the state. But in effect, there will be no cost-benefit analysis performed of this massive project, which seems to me run completely counter to the feelings of the people of this state and this nation at this point in times of fiscal difficulty. I think it's a dereliction of duty on the part of the legislature at this point to allow this to occur, and would wholly support the bill before you today to provide at least a basic independent cost-benefit analysis, to be able to look at other alternatives which have arisen, such as ones that some in Berry Hill and others have been promoting. The Department of Water Resources' own study, called the DREAM study, gives serious question as to whether this is the most effective solution to the state's problems on a cost-benefit basis, and I think you need to promote that process. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, David Jones on behalf of the City of Stockton. I will not be redundant, but I will echo the comments of my colleagues. We think the fiduciary responsibility of this body is to take a look and get that extra information when we're talking about taxpayer money and public money for such an important project. We think legislative oversight makes sense, and we think this is a reasonable and prudent approach to addressing where we find ourselves today, and we'd ask for an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Other witnesses in support, we'll just ask you to identify yourselves and state your position, please.
Lori Chin on behalf of Clean Water Action in support.
Okay. Any others in support?
Connor Everett, Southern California Watershed in support. Thank you.
All right. Witnesses in I'm sorry, there's another support.
And the Lodi Chamber of Commerce in support.
Thank you, sir. Witnesses in opposition, please come forward. Good morning, Mr. Manning.
Good morning, Chair Huffman.
How are you?
And committee members. My name is Ed Manning. I represent Westlands Water District, Mojave Water Agency in San Bernardino County, and Western Municipal Water District in Riverside County. This hearing reminds me of a movie called Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray had to relive every day until he got it right.
But he learns to play the piano really well
Yes,
by the end of it.
He does. Where to start? For those of you who were here in 2009, like Chair Huffman, nothing that has been said today is new. All of the arguments advanced by the supporters of the bill and with respect to the author were advanced in opposition to the Delta package that was in SB 7X1 that passed in 2009. The opponents lost that debate. It was a package that was difficult to negotiate, took several years, gave Mr. Huffman a lot more gray hair, and perhaps me too. And it was a difficult series of trade-offs that were fundamentally critical to the future of California and the future of water supply in California. That historic agreement made clear a couple things, and I'd like to correct a couple things that are just fundamentally wrong in the testimony you heard. First of all, the legislature agreed, and it's right here in the legislation on page, my eyes are getting bad, 38 of SB 7X1, that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which is a multi-species aquatic habitat plan intended to meet, according to the legislation, the difficult standard of California law, which is the NCCP, Natural Community Conservation Plan standard, that plan, which is being done to get Endangered Species Act take permits under federal and state law, if done to the satisfaction of Fish and Game and this new Delta Stewardship Council we created, would be at the center of the Delta plan and would allow for, ultimately, permits to be issued for conveyance or peripheral canal. There is an EIR-EIS being developed on that, which the legislature understood and recognized. That is looking at alternatives, size of canal, mitigation obligations, etc. Over $150 million in 5 years later, and enough agencies to fill up a phone book, federal and state agencies, that plan is still not complete. Who's paying for the plan? The ratepayers from the agencies involved, state and federal water project contractors, not the taxpayers. Who's paying for the canal? This bill prohibits the state from paying for the canal. It is a falsehood that they will be paying for the canal. The ratepayers will be paying for a canal. This issue is critical. If this bill would pass this committee, it would send a horrible signal to all of the people who participated, the labor unions, the water contractors, the business community, the environmental community, in a very difficult series of trade-offs. Ultimately, the Delta, as it stands now, is not sustainable, and everyone recognizes that, and that was at the heart of the legislation that was passed. The status quo doesn't work. It doesn't work for the environment, and it doesn't work for the various stakeholders. There is tremendous uncertainty, which we understand, in the Delta communities, and there's tremendous uncertainty among the people who've invested over $150 million in an ongoing process, hoping to get to the end and potentially get permits. That uncertainty is uncomfortable. It's difficult. But we all made trade-offs in that legislation. And I would like to point out just what the bill says, because I think this fundamentally undermines the trade-offs in the legislation. It was clear that things were going to change in the Delta. One of the things that you have to do as part of the implementation of this 2009 legislation is that actions taken in the Delta or actions that could affect the Delta have to go through a consistency determination by the Delta Stewardship Council. very difficult trade-off. But it means things were going to change for everyone. This bill says, notwithstanding any other law, the construction and operation of a peripheral canal shall not diminish or negatively affect the water supplies, water rights, or quality of water for water users within the Delta watershed, or impose any new burdens on infrastructure within or financial burdens on persons residing in the Delta. That basically means any changes in the Delta that people in the Delta don't like would result in a veto power over the project, over the BDCP. And that's not what we agreed on in this bill. I would welcome all of you to read it. There are trade-offs in this bill that the legislature voted on, and a historic bill to try to put the Delta on the right path and put water infrastructure on the right path, and with co-equal goals. That's the other thing. This language is not balanced. This is a veto. The co-equal goals, water supply reliability, environmental restoration, and protection, were the key to this package. To go back now and completely and fundamentally undermine this bill would be a horrible signal for the state. For that reason, we oppose the bill.
Thank you. Ms. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Happy New Year to you all. As my colleague, Mr. Manning, so eloquently stated, AB 550 does seek to reopen the 2009 legislative package. I think what we have here, we see some deadlines coming in the not-too-distant future. A public draft of the EIR-EIS is due out this summer. And this is a plan, as Mr. Manning mentioned, that is designed to address the co-equal goals. This is going to be an environmental program, investments in improved conveyance in the Delta like no other, subject to full environmental review. And the other point to mention is it's really important in the 2009 package. This legislature specifically put in that package that in the event Fish and Game determines that the BDCP is consistent with all existing state environmental laws and the NCCP, and it gives it the green light to be melded into the Delta plan, it is subject to appeal. You have the ability to appeal that decision of Fish and Game. So there is already an opportunity to redress those grievances. Critics suggest that the public water agencies like Santa Clara Valley Water District, Kern County Water Agency, Metropolitan, Kern County, Zone 7 in Alameda County, Castaic Lake, I could go on, are exerting unprecedented influence over this planning process. When all is said and done, those same public water agencies will have paid nearly $250 million to underwrite this planning process alone. That legislation back in 2009 specifically said the beneficiaries of this program shall pay, and we have stepped up to that commitment. The proponents claim, too, that BDCP is some backroom deal. I'd say after 300 some odd public sessions, many well attended by Delta interest, those claims are unfounded. And I want to, in response to one of the proponents' claims on the bill, said that there are constituents of the export interests that aren't willing to step up and pay for the improvements in the Delta. I would argue that's not correct. We have a letter from 23 of our 26 member public agencies that say we are behind this BDCP. We get it. We need this program to address the co-equal goals of water reliability and ecosystem improvements in the Delta. We're behind Metropolitan the entire way. We're ready to step up, evaluate the alternative, the preferred alternative that comes out in the planning documents this summer, give it a good look, do the math, and determine whether or not it makes sense for the ratepayers of Southern California. We're pretty confident that we will be there in the end, but it does represent a huge investment past and ongoing. So let's stick to the rules of the road that the legislature adopted 2 years ago. Don't change the games don't change the rules of the game at this point. And on behalf of the Metropolitan Water District, I urge your no vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cindy Tuck with the Association of California Water Agencies. I could talk for a long time on this, but I think Mr. Manning and Ms. Cole have stated our arguments for against the bill very well. So Aqua opposes the bill and urges a no vote.
Thank you. Other witnesses in opposition?
Yes, Andy Fields for the California Alliance for Jobs, representing 80,000 union construction workers. And I'd like to also mimic the comments of my colleagues. I can't say it much better, but I will say this, that the three labor unions that I represent, the laborers, operating engineers, and carpenters, would be very disheartened to find out that we are unraveling the negotiations that we've already made in 2009 that took so much work, including the involvement of my labor unions. And to add, layers and layers of regulation on top of what already exists would not only be confounding to, I think, the average citizen, but I think it's just bad government, and we urge a no vote. Thank you.
Ed Behrens, on behalf of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, in opposition to the bill for reasons already articulated.
Thank you.
Christian Foy, on behalf of the Three Valleys Municipal Water District, also in opposition.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Ron Davis on behalf of the Alameda County Water District and Eastern Municipal Water District. We are also opposed for the reasons already stated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer West on behalf of the California Municipal Utilities Association. We are opposed for reasons already stated. Thank you.
Dennis Albiani on behalf of Castaic Lake Water Agency. We oppose.
Dave Pulio, Western Growers Association. We're opposed for the reasons stated.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. Glenn Farrell with the Friant Water Authority in opposition.
Chair Huffman and members, good morning. Mark Thiessen with the Gualco Group on behalf of the Zone 7 Water Agency of Eastern Alameda County in opposition. Thank you.
Maureen Higgins representing Biocom, also in opposition.
Morning, members. Tom Martinez, Santa Clara Valley Water District, also in opposition. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Kendra Dijogo with the Gualco Group on behalf of the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District and the Kern County Water Agency, also in opposition.
Mr. Chair, members, Brian Reese on behalf of the Inland Empire Utility Agency in opposition.
Meg Katzen-Brown representing the California Water Association, also in opposition.
Very good. Let's go back to the committee. I see Mr. Gatto has his hand up first.
So just a few questions on this. Putting aside for a minute Clause 118 in the law, which pretty strictly restricts the ability of this ever to be built. Question I have is with Clause 116, and that is, can we pass a statute requiring a future legislature to pass a statute? Wouldn't that have to be in the Constitution?
Ledge Council advises me that this statute is perfectly legal. Certainly, we do pass things all the time that get changed by the courts, so that would be an argument for a future court. What we are passing is I don't want to say undoing. We passed off all of our oversight responsibilities and authorities the legislature did in 2009 to an unelected board. What this bill does is pull that back. So if we had the authority to have it originally and we delegated it away, we have the authority to pull it back.
So that's very appealing to me, and I think you know that. But I think the legislature has a history of delegating too much power to unelected boards. But don't we retain the power to, for lack of a better word, at a future date, veto whatever this board does? I mean, you're basically saying that the legislature can pass a statute or must pass a statute. Can't we pass a statute in 2011, 2012, 2013 if we don't like what they do?
Certainly we can take actions after the genie is out of the bottle, yes. What this bill is trying to do is say if there are checks and balances that are needed in a large infrastructure project like that, we should be putting it in place now. It sends the signal that, hey, we're watching, as opposed to saying we're not going to do anything, we're completely going to have our hands off. But what the bill doesn't prescribe anything about who can issue a permit, who can't issue a permit, what the conclusions are going to be, about what the size of the canal should be. It doesn't prescribe anything about the project. It just says go through the process, do exactly what the legislature intended you to do in 2009, but we're watching. Whatever you come up with, we are ultimately going to approve or disapprove. And we're going to have all the facts in front of us when we make that decision.
So I agree that that's what sections 115 through 116 of the proposed law do, but it's 118 that I have an issue with. 118 is the one that has some very vaguely worded language that I think does sort of provide a veto right for a very narrow section of the state, and that's what I have a concern with. The rest of the law I have no problem with.
Well, then let me just address that issue, because the nice thing about being in the first policy committee running a bill that would have to go through the floor and another policy committee and the floor in the Senate and to the governor is we have lots of opportunities to fix that language. As you noticed from my opening statement, that piece was not part of my push for the bill. If the committee would, if I could earn your vote by deleting Section 118 and just having the piece that says we need an economic analysis by an independent body, the LAO, and we need to vote it up or down once we know how much it's going to cost. If we can get those two principles, I would be happy to delete Section 118 to earn your vote.
What do you say, Mr. Gatto? Is that a motion? Mr. Berryhill.
Yes, appreciate Assemblywoman Huber bringing this forward. I think we heard testimony at our hearing that water could cost $800 to $1,000 an acre foot. That's striking when we talk about this being water for agriculture. There's no way if in fact that's going to be the cost after all this is put in place, agriculture will have no choice but to sell their water. Then they'll be accused of being bums because they're selling their water for a profit when they had no choice because they can't farm with that expensive water. I think it's very reasonable to expect that this legislature provides some oversight, lest we all believe in bureaucracy gone wild. And that's all this is. This is a check so that we don't end up with another high-speed rail where the price doubles and all of a sudden everybody that has to use that water for agriculture goes, oh, crap, we can't, what are we going to do now? And so they end up selling it. They got no choice. I don't think we should have the oversight. We should have the knowledge of what this is going to cost. I mean, that is reasonable. Keep in mind, some of the opponents of this bill make it sound like we passed this bond by a mile. We passed this thing at 5 in the morning by a vote. I mean, 5 in the morning, working out details. Okay, I guarantee you at 5 in the morning you miss a few details in this legislature. And so this is one of those areas we should have had in there, some oversight over what the costs are going to be. Those others say, the process is to put the Delta on the right path. Yet no one from the Delta supports the path that they're trying to put us on. And so I strongly support this bill. I urge my colleagues to support it. The amendments that Assemblymember Gatto talked about I think are reasonable. And we'll look forward to moving this bill out and the Assemblywoman having a chance to make some amendments and make it a better bill.
All right.
And that's a motion.
All right. The motion by Mr. Berryhill, Ms. Yamada, I think, is seconding it.
I was going to say I'd be pleased to second it because I want to just take this opportunity, although my name is on this bill, I want to take this moment to really publicly thank Assemblymember Huber for her courage on many levels, not just this bill, but in all walks of her life. And the fact that there have not been any Delta names as authors on any of the bills that were passed really in the middle of the night, or it was early in the morning, wasn't it?
Mr. Steinberg might take exception.
Yes, I remember Mr. Steinberg sitting right there and as a freshman legislator at around 11 or 12 midnight at that point, having to say the same things about the bill package that we've heard this morning. And why I could not support that 5-bill package. But I do want to say that I appreciate your bringing this forward again. And since I was the only one to move it last time, I see some change already and some progress. And that, again, if we have nothing to fear, then I don't see any reason why we would not push this bill forward today. I think the taxpayers, and I appreciate hearing the testimony from the opponents of the bill about who's paying, but ultimately we will all be paying for this. And I think to abdicate our legislative responsibilities to a 7-member, and I'm sorry Mr. Gatto had to leave the room, but a 7-member unelected body, I said the same thing 2 years ago, I'll say it now, and so I'm happy to support this bill.
All right. Just a quick clarification from Mr. Berryhill and Ms. Yamada. Are you moving the bill with the deletion of Section 118 as an amendment? As is. Okay, and that's the second. Thank you for that clarification. Let me just chime in here, and others may still have things to add. But with respect to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, I think it remains to be seen whether that plan will be built around what we have historically thought of as a peripheral canal. Certainly there are some checks in place. The price tag that has been mentioned is going to be one of those checks. We'll see how that plays out. But there were many checks put into the 2009 legislation. I helped to write many of those in. State water board permits for public trust flows, the consideration of the public trust flow analysis that was created by the state board, the very high scientific standards. A number of things have to happen. So we're not without checks. However, at the same time, I will say since the passage of the 2009 legislation, as we have watched BDCP run, I have been concerned. I've been concerned that some of those checks have been creatively reinterpreted by some, including a very important policy that I helped to put in there about reducing reliance on the Delta in the future. That has now been creatively reinterpreted by some water exporters to using, frankly, pretty creative future growth and per capita assumptions to basically call for increased exports from the Delta and to argue that that's somehow consistent with that policy. And I do not agree with that. So I see some red flags with the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and that is the reason why I am going to cast a yes vote for this bill here this morning, not because I want to reopen all of this, but because, frankly, I think casting a vote in favor of this is consistent with the letters that I have been writing and the concerns that I have been raising about some of these red flags with the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and hopefully they will get it right. We do have requirements that they consider all sorts of alternatives, that they not fixate on a large peripheral canal, but we also know that the National Academy of Science, in reviewing their work, basically criticized them for doing just that, for creating a so-called conservation plan that was really driven by a large export facility, and the science was sort of an attempt to dress up that facility-driven process. That's not what many of us intended with the 2009 legislation. So I see an opportunity here. Perhaps it's a symbolic opportunity. We'll see how the votes shake out, but I don't mind at all sending that additional message to the folks at BDCP that they need to get back to the spirit and the letter of the 2009 legislation, and so I'll be voting in favor. Yes, Dr. Halderman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for bringing this forward, Ms. Huber. I think you are representing your constituents well, and I do think that a number of our colleagues are representing their constituents well, and for that reason, I am going to represent my constituents well. Questions were asked. What are the opponents afraid of? I don't think there's anything to fear in this bill. What is scary are food lines on the west side of the Central Valley. In a district which now has an unemployment rate of 40% due to the gutting of agricultural-related jobs, due to inadequate, delayed water conveyance, due to inadequate water storage, and due to inadequate water infrastructure. I think that's scary. I think food lines in which 80% of the people are Hispanic is a little more than scary. It seems a bit pointed. It seems that the Central Valley gets to take the brunt of it again. I do understand that the Delta constituents did not agree, and you are very consistent. You were opposed to those bills. You did not vote in support of those. You were not part of saying this is an okay negotiation. But others were. And if we don't keep promises, I think we are setting ourselves up as a body for more dysfunction. I agree, there are some issues with the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, but it must be allowed to go forward, and it must be looked at as a plan itself, not as a weapon I don't agree with this bill, but I certainly understand your reason for bringing it forward, and I would respectfully ask for my colleagues' no vote.
Ms. Olson.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. I agree with my colleague, Assemblywoman Linda Halderman, that we have major problems on the west side of our districts due to a lack of water supply. I wholeheartedly agree, and I complain about that almost daily. However, I believe this law simply allows us to do the job we were elected to do. We were elected by our voters to say our job is to provide oversight to state government. And I don't see anything in this bill that goes beyond that, that says we can have a peripheral canal or we cannot have a peripheral canal. It simply says once the Department of Water Resources, the BDCP, all the others go through their due diligence, their engineering studies, et cetera, to determine how and whether it should be done, that we have the opportunity to have a say on how that moves forward. That's our job. That's what we were elected to do. And I'm a member who constantly complains about our out of control bureaucracies. And I agree with many statements that we are constantly deferring that authority to the bureaucracy anymore. And at some point, we've got to man up and we've got to say, I'm willing to do the job that my voters elected me to do. I agree with Assemblyman Gatto. I would support removing that amendment. I understand the motion on the floor is to leave it alone, and I'm okay with that too. But I have to support this bill today, again, not as a statement of being for or against the peripheral canal, but as a statement that I believe our job is to provide oversight to state government.
All right, any other members? Ms. Huber, would you like to close?
I would, if you wouldn't mind to give me just a couple of minutes here, because I do want to echo what Assemblymember Olson just said, which is the bill is not designed to undo anything that was done in the legislative package, with the exception of the trade-off that says the legislature has to keep their hands off of the largest infrastructure project we've ever seen in California. The piece of that package that said we have no right to look back at anything that they have done. And that I find extremely troubling. When the opposition makes arguments that if you do this, you are undoing the entire deal, it concerns me because it does raise a red flag to say we don't want the legislature to have any authority after we've done all of this. After we've made our deals and we've paid for our plans and the plans come out, we don't want the legislature to look at it. That is troubling to me. And all this bill asks for, and like I said, I'm perfectly willing to take out Section 118 if it means the bill can move forward and we can continue this dialogue with the rest of the legislature. All we want is information and oversight. And if we can get those two things, then I think the entire process will be healthier. And I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
The action is due pass. Huffman?
Aye.
Huffman, aye. Halderman? No. Halderman, no. Berryhill? Aye. Berryhill, aye. Blumenfield? No. Blumenfield, no. Campos? No. Campos, no. Fong? Aye. Fong, aye. Gatto? Hernandez? Hueso? Jones? No. Jones, no. Lara? No. Lara, no. Olson? Aye. Olson, aye. Yamada? Aye. Yamada, aye.
Needs one.
Ms. Huber, that has 5 votes and is on call.
Thank you.
All right, we will leave the roll open for a few more minutes for any absent members to add on. We'll lift the call on the Dickinson bill.
On which one?
Why don't you lift the call on the Dickinson bill right now? On Dickinson, you want to lift the call to let? Yeah.
On Dickinson, the current vote is 6-2. Do pass with amendments. The absent members were Hernandez, Hueso.
Aye.
Hueso, aye. Lara. Lara, aye. Olson.
All right, the Dickinson bill's out. We'll lift the call on the Huber bill. All right. All right.
Lifting the call on the Huber bill. Current vote is 5-5. Do pass. Absent members Gatto. Hernandez. Hueso.
No.
Hueso, no.
Mr. Gatto. Calling Mr. Gatto. We'll come back to that. Yes, we. Okay. Take a moment, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's see.
Just want to add on here.
Which one was it?
We'll come back to that last call when we're.
It was this one. Okay. AB 157. Lara?
No.
Lara, no. Oops.
Did you need to add on anything?
On what's
good to go?
On AB 157, Hueso, no. That bill is dead.
Mr. Jeffries, AB 157 fails. 10 to 1, right? 1 to 10. Whoops. That makes a difference.
Bipartisan either way, nonetheless.
And we're going to give Mr. Gatto another minute here to decide how he's going to vote. Ms. Huber, actually, either way Mr. Gatto votes, the bill is going to be short. It's at 5.
You've got 11 members?
No, it needs 7. So we will let him add on, but we're going to go ahead and close the roll on that since the votes are going to be short.
In the daily file, you have 11.
We're missing a member, 13 members.
Yeah.
Do you think that Kristen Olson and I are the same person?
Well, you're not?
You ever see him at the same time?
You only have, as of, the official record is that you have 11 members. Water Parks and Wildlife? Yes, Water Parks and Wildlife, 11 members. Listed. Well, if you have vacancies, do they count?
We don't have vacancies.
Oh, vacancy is the chair. It's okay. That's okay. It's okay.
So Gatto Gatto, no. The hearing is adjourned.
Gatto, no.